He was tied up, forced to watch as the child was dragged away screaming into the darkness, a moment no soldier should ever face. That image stayed with him. It clawed into every breath, every nightmare, a wound deeper than any bullet. From that night, he made one silent promise. He would hunt down the entire network responsible, even if the mission cost him his life. This is the story of guilt turning into courage, and a rescue mission powered by a heart that refused to surrender. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Fog drifting over Astoria's silent docks beneath the cold winter rain. Ethan Cole sat bound to a metal chair in the center of an abandoned warehouse, the cold steel floor vibrating faintly beneath him every time the storm winds pushed against the rattling walls. He had worked in darkness before, fought in deserts where silence pressed against the skin like a second heartbeat, survived ambushes where the air smelled of burning sand and metal, but nothing compared to the quiet terror creeping up his spine now, because this time he wasn't fighting for his own life. A child was involved, a small boy, Max, huddled near the loading ramp, his hand shaking though he tried to hide it by pressing his knuckles to his lips. Max didn't cry loudly. He didn't beg. He had passed the stage of panic long ago, slipping into the deeper, colder kind of fear that settled into the ribs like ice. Ethan recognized it instantly. He had seen that look before, in villages overseas, in refugee shelters, in the eyes of kids who had already understood too much. Ethan's wrists burned as he tested the ropes again. They were tight, soaked with salty moisture from the rain leaking through the roof. The men who tied him weren't professionals, but they were thorough, the type who didn't hesitate, who didn't think twice before hurting someone smaller. They moved around the room with an eerie calm, sorting through crates, adjusting equipment, checking the van parked just outside. Max flinched whenever their boots scraped on the concrete. One of the men shoved him toward the back, muttering something about the schedule and the pickup. Ethan clenched his jaw so hard a pulse shot through his forehead. He had walked into this ambush because he believed they were transporting weapons. He had been wrong, tragically wrong, and Max was paying for it. Rain hammered the thin metal roof in relentless waves. The cold seeped into Ethan's bones, numbing his fingers, slowing his thoughts. He forced himself to breathe in steady, measured intervals. The same breathing technique drilled into him back in SEAL training. Control the breath, control the fear. But there were some moments no amount of training could steady, like watching a terrified child being pushed toward a van that had nothing good on the other side of its doors. Ethan shifted slightly, letting his chair tilt a fraction of an inch. He needed noise, something, anything to draw the men's attention just long enough. Not to provoke them, but to create the smallest window of distraction. Before he could act, a sound rose from the darkness behind a stack of rusted pallets. A growl, low, deliberate, vibrating like a wire pulled tight. The traffickers didn't hear it, but Ethan felt the sound run through him like a jolt of electricity. Rex. There was history in that growl, memory etched into instinct. Rex wasn't just a trained partner. He was a survivor forged by trials that would have broken weaker beings. Missions gone wrong, nights spent tracking insurgents through wastelands. The collapse of a building where Rex clawed through debris until his paws bled, refusing to leave Ethan behind. Loyalty wasn't something he offered lightly. It was something he lived. And now he was here, somewhere behind the crates, silent until he chose not to be. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose, leaning back just enough to let Rex see the angle of his chin, a subtle signal they had practiced for years. The shadows shifted. One trafficker turned slightly, as if sensing movement, but he dismissed it. The shadows exploded. Rex burst forward, a streak of sheer willpower and muscle driving straight into the nearest man. The impact knocked the trafficker off his feet, a surprised shout tearing through the warehouse. The second man spun toward the noise, reaching for something inside his jacket. Ethan threw his weight sideways, slamming the chair legs against the floor. The loud metallic screech succeeded. The man's attention flicked toward Ethan instead of Rex. And that was enough. Ethan twisted his wrists downward, scraping them against the jagged metal edge of a broken crate beside him. Fire shot through his skin as the rope fibers tore. Rex growled again, a deep, commanding rumble, forcing the armed man to hesitate. Ethan ripped one hand free. He lunged. The second trafficker barely raised his arm before Ethan slammed into him, using the momentum of his freed hand and the weight of the chair still tied to the other. The man fell backward. Rex leaped onto his chest, pinning him with silent fury. Ethan grabbed the strap of the man's tactical vest, reaching instinctively for anything he could weaponize. His fingers closed around a cold metal sphere clipped to the vest. A grenade. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He simply acted. The pin came free with a sharp metallic snap. The trafficker's eyes widened. Ethan grabbed Rex by the collar, sprinting toward the nearest window with everything he had left. He didn't look back. The explosion hit like a giant's hammer, a wave of pressure and heat that hurled them through the shattered frame. Glass sliced past his shoulders. Air burned his lungs. Rain slapped his face before he hit the muddy ditch outside. Sound vanished for a moment, replaced by a thick, underwater silence. Ethan tasted blood, mud, the metallic sting of adrenaline fading too fast. Rex whimpered weakly beside him, trying to nudge Ethan with his nose. "Max?" Ethan breathed, vision failing. "I'll come back for you, I swear." The world tilted. Darkness swept in, and Ethan Cole slipped under, clinging to the last image of the boy who needed him more than ever. Morning fog drifting over the damp forests near Tillamook, Oregon. A dull ache pulsed behind Ethan Cole's eyes as he forced himself awake on the worn couch inside his remote cabin. The faint scent of smoke still clung to his jacket, a reminder of the explosion that had torn the warehouse apart. His muscles felt heavy, his ribs stiff beneath the bandages he'd wrapped around them in the dark. He didn't remember how he'd managed to drag himself and Rex out of the ditch and through the storm, but the cabin's cracked wooden walls now sheltered the aftermath of a night he wished he could erase. Rex lay curled beside the door, his breathing slow but steady. He had refused to rest at first, pacing the cabin despite a limp in his front leg. It was only when Ethan collapsed onto the couch that the dog finally lowered himself to the floor. Rex never fully relaxed. Even asleep, his ears twitched at every creak in the wood or gust of wind outside. He carried the old instincts of a soldier who had survived too much. The two of them were alike in that way. Ethan pressed a hand to his forehead, fighting the sting of memory. Max's frightened eyes flickered again behind his closed lids. The boy had been dragged into the van, helpless, and Ethan's promise to him now sat like a burning coal in his chest. He wanted to get up, to chase every lead, to tear apart Oregon's entire coastline until he found the boy. But his body wasn't ready, not yet. He needed time to think, time to breathe, time to figure out how the hell he'd been ambushed in Astoria. But time never stayed long. Late that afternoon, the quiet of the forest shifted. A distant engine groaned along the gravel road leading past the cabin. Ethan straightened. Vehicles didn't travel this deep into Tillamook unless they had a reason. Rex rose too, ears forward, focused. Ethan stepped toward the narrow window, moving slowly to avoid the throbbing in his ribs. A delivery truck rumbled past, its tires kicking up mist from last night's rain. He'd seen dozens of trucks like it around the state, plain white, no decals, no logos. But as it passed, the afternoon sun caught the metal surface at just the right angle. A symbol appeared on the back panel, a small, weathered sticker peeling at the corners, a serpent coiled around a thin arrow. For a moment, Ethan's breath stopped. He didn't know how he had missed it before, but memory slammed back like a hammer. That same symbol, he had seen it years ago during a failed interdiction, then again on classified documents tied to a trafficking cell operating covertly along the Pacific Northwest. And suddenly, with terrifying clarity, he remembered the serpent symbol had been tattooed onto one of the men who took Max. The room felt colder. Rex growled softly, picking up the tension in Ethan's shoulders. Ethan grabbed the edge of the window frame. If that symbol was on a food delivery truck, then this cell wasn't just moving people. They were using legitimate supply routes to cover their tracks. He followed the truck with his eyes until it vanished into the curve of the road leading toward the docks south of Tillamook. His thoughts raced. The truck's direction narrowed the possibilities. There was only one route it could take that made sense. The loading ferries heading toward Greyhaven Island, a private island used by corporations as a logistics hub. A hub that Ethan had always suspected of something darker, but never had enough proof to investigate alone. Now he had more than proof. He had a symbol burned into his mind. He had a boy he needed to save. Ethan grabbed his gear slowly, forcing his damaged muscles to obey. Every movement hurt, but pain meant nothing now. He tightened the straps of his backpack, checked his knife, then crouched beside Rex. "You're not ready," he whispered. Rex stared back with a quiet, unyielding determination, the same look he gave at the entrance of a collapsed building in Fallujah years ago, when Ethan had told him to stay behind. Rex had gone in anyway, digging through rubble until he found survivors. That memory struck Ethan harder than the pain in his ribs. "All right," he breathed, "but stay close." He locked the cabin, though he doubted any lock would matter to the kind of people he was going after. The forest greeted them with cold air and a rolling gray mist. Ethan kept to the back trails, moving slowly, using the terrain for support. Rex walked beside him, adjusting his pace when Ethan winced. As dusk approached, Ethan reached a cliff overlook that faced the distant shoreline. Far out at sea, he could faintly see the faint outline of a cargo ferry, one of the few ships that docked at Greyhaven. A small tugboat guided it, pushing through the heavy tide. The symbol wouldn't leave his thoughts. Why would a legitimate delivery truck be marked with something used by a trafficking cell? And why were they bold enough to let the symbol drift into public view? Unless they didn't fear anyone looking. Unless the routes were protected, hidden under corporate cover. Unless the missing children were being taken somewhere no one thought to check. Fog crept toward the cliffs, swallowing the horizon. Ethan's mind raced through possibilities, forming patterns, drawing connections. The symbol, the route, Grey Haven, the ambush, Max. None of it felt random. A faint rustle behind him broke his thoughts. Rex had lifted his head toward the woods. A twig snapped deeper within the trees. Too deliberate for an animal, too soft for a hiker. Someone was there, someone watching. Ethan's pulse quickened. He slowly reached for the knife at his hip, scanning the darkening tree line. The air seemed to tighten like a held breath. "Come on, boy," he whispered, stepping backward. Rex growled low, his body angled protectively in front of Ethan. Another step in the leaves. Closer this time. Whoever stood beyond the shadows wasn't moving away. They were approaching. Rex stiffened. Ethan braced. The last of the sunlight vanished behind the clouds, plunging the forest into a cold, uncertain dusk. And for the first time since the explosion, Ethan felt the same instinct he'd felt in many war zones. The certainty that someone else had just entered the story. Someone connected to the same darkness that had taken Max. And that he and Rex were no longer alone on this mountain. Cold mist coiling through the dense forests of Grey Haven Island. The air felt heavier on Grey Haven than on the mainland. Ethan Cole sensed it the moment he and Rex stepped off the small ferry and disappeared into the tree line before any dock worker could notice them. Every sound here carried a strange echo, as if the island itself were listening. Ethan moved slowly, his ribs still aching, but the sharp focus in his eyes returned piece by piece. Rex kept close, padding silently over wet leaves, occasionally lifting his head to test the wind. The dog's instincts were keener than any sensor Ethan had ever used. They had survived years together that way, leaning on each other's reflexes, trusting each other's pace. Now they moved deeper into the island, following no trail except the one Ethan believed would eventually lead to Max. They settled into a temporary shelter Ethan constructed beneath a slanted rock formation. It wasn't comfortable, but it kept them hidden. The forest here was thick with cedar and pine, their branches woven tightly overhead like a roof. Ethan spent the first 2 nights watching the dirt road through his binoculars. Delivery trucks rolled in and out with mechanical accuracy, morning, noon, and sometimes late in the evening. Yet no one walked the road. No workers smoked by the fences. No chatter, no laughter, no sound of ordinary human life. Only machines, only silence. Suspicion was confirmation. On the 3rd day, the stillness broke. A distant crack, not wood snapping, but the short, sharp thunder of a gunshot. Ethan froze. Rex lifted his head, hackles rising. Another shot followed, then the chaotic crescendo of bodies moving fast through underbrush. Ethan grabbed his gear. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Rex, though both knew the dog would never truly stay behind when danger approached. They moved toward the source of the sound, quietly and low. The forest trembled with hurried footsteps, light ones, frantic, crashing through branches without caution. Then came heavier ones following close behind. A chase. A figure burst through the trees, stumbling toward Ethan's position. It was a girl, perhaps 14 or 15, moving with the desperate energy of someone who knew she had only seconds left. Her clothes were dirty, torn at the sleeve. Her breathing was ragged, each inhale sharp enough to cut. Ethan saw the way she scanned her surroundings, fast, sharp, instinctive, someone who'd been running for more than just a few minutes. Before Ethan could reveal himself, two armed men emerged behind her, both carrying compact rifles. They were clearly trained, moving with formation precision. These weren't scavengers. They weren't island workers. They were hunters. The girl tripped, falling forward. One man raised his rifle. Ethan didn't think. He stepped out from behind the cedar trunk just as Rex bolted forward like a silent projectile. Ethan's voice was low and cold, the tone he used only when there was no turning back. "Drop it." The men spun, but too late. Rex collided with the first gunman, knocking him backward into the mud. Ethan lunged at the second, slamming him against a thick tree trunk. The impact rattled the man's grip, allowing Ethan to wrench the rifle free. A quick strike to the jaw sent him collapsing into the ferns. Rex growled as he pinned the first man, who finally stopped fighting. Ethan knelt, catching his breath long enough to confirm both attackers were unconscious. Then he turned to the girl. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, but the tremor throughout her body said otherwise. Up close, she looked exhausted rather than frightened. The exhaustion of someone who had been fighting for survival long before today. "My name's Ethan," he said quietly. "This is Rex. We're not here to hurt you." The girl swallowed, eyes flicking between him and the dog. "My name is Harper." Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Ethan recognized something in her tone, that guarded undertone used by kids who'd lost the luxury of trust. "How long have you been on the run?" he asked. Harper hesitated, then answered with stark honesty. "Weeks." Ethan's chest tightened. "And how did you get here?" "Taken?" she murmured. "But I escaped the compound. There are more kids, lots more." The knot in Ethan's stomach tightened. He crouched so he could look her in the eyes. "I'm looking for a boy named Max. Have you seen him?" Harper thought for a moment. "Not in the main camp, but they move kids. Hide them. Prepare them for transport. Some are kept in the underground facility. Some only stay for a few days. Some don't stay long." Her voice cracked at the last part, though she tried to hide it. Ethan didn't push. He offered her water. She drank shakily. Rex sat beside her, watching her with calm, steady attention. Harper wiped her mouth and looked at Ethan again. "If you're going to get him back, you'll need to move soon. They're planning a shipment tonight." Ethan's heart punched against his ribcage. A shipment. Kids being moved. If Max was still alive, tonight might be his only chance. But before Ethan could ask more questions, Harper stiffened. Ethan heard it a second later. Voices, more than two, coming through the forest. Rex growled low, tail rigid. Ethan grabbed Harper by the shoulder. "We need to move, now." They slipped back into the trees, Ethan guiding Harper between the roots as Rex stayed behind just long enough to mask their trail with disrupted leaves. The voices grew closer, sharper. The men were tracking, searching. Ethan tightened his grip on Harper's arm. "Stay quiet. Stay close." Harper nodded, her expression shifting from fear to resolve. They crept deeper into the forest, moving toward the shelter Ethan had set up days ago. The woods darkened as clouds rolled overhead, swallowing the sun. Every sound became sharper. Every snapped twig, every breath, every heartbeat. Finally, they reached the hidden alcove beneath the rocks. Ethan helped Harper crawl inside first. Rex followed, his body tense and alert. But before Ethan could enter, a sharp beam of light cut through the trees behind them. A flashlight. "Spread out," a man shouted. They couldn't have gotten far. Ethan's pulse hammered. Harper pulled him inside, her voice barely above a breath. "They won't stop." Ethan steadied her with one hand. "No," he whispered, "but neither will I." Rex pressed close to Ethan's leg, muscles coiled like a drawn bow. Outside, footsteps circled, then stopped. Silence, heavy, suffocating, calculated, until a new voice came, deeper than the others. "Find a girl, and bring me the man with the dog." Harper's face drained of color. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Someone on Greyhaven knew exactly who he was, and the hunt had officially begun. Storm clouds gathering above the dense pines of Greyhaven Island. The world outside the rocky alcove had shifted. Ethan Cole felt it in the way the air grew tight, like the island itself was holding its breath. The voices that had been scattered moments earlier now moved with grim purpose. Whoever commanded the search teams wasn't simply reacting, he was orchestrating. Ethan pressed a hand against the cold rock wall, grounding himself as Harper crouched in the shadows beside him, her breathing steadying only because she forced it to. Rex stayed near the entrance, unmoving except for the subtle rise and fall of his chest, eyes glowing faintly with animal defiance. Night fell heavier than usual, swallowing the last streaks of light. The forest became a maze of blackened trunks and shifting shadows. Ethan listened carefully. Patterns, footsteps, communication rhythms. He could tell which men were professionals and which were simply following orders. Years of missions had carved the ability into him to distinguish danger by sound alone. Harper tugged at his sleeve lightly. "They won't leave," she whispered. "They want me back, and they want you because you messed up their shipment schedule." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He had already known that the moment he heard the commanding voice. Whoever it was seemed to know more about Ethan than he should, and that thought pushed unease deeper under Ethan's ribs. He looked at Harper. "You did well surviving this long, but now they know you're not dead. They'll throw everything at finding you." Harper nodded reluctantly. "I heard them talk once. They said kids who escape cause trouble for the operation. Loose pieces invite attention. That's what they said." Ethan's jaw tightened. These people weren't just criminals. They were systematic, trained, efficient. He turned to Rex and tapped twice on the ground, a silent signal. Rex moved to a lower stance, ready but quiet. Ethan had used that command only a handful of times in their years together, and it usually meant one thing: the battle would get worse before it got better. The first wave came sooner than expected. Leaves rustled, branches cracked, the steady rhythm of multiple boots approached. Ethan didn't wait for them to corner the alcove. He guided Harper deeper into the narrow space between boulders, where she could hide if things turned bad. "Stay down, no matter what," he murmured. Harper nodded, her eyes reflecting both fear and steel. The gunmen entered the clearing. 3 of them, silent, disciplined, each sweeping a different direction. Ethan recognized the formation. He had used it himself in raids. The men wore communication earpieces and compact weapons for maneuvering through dense forest. Their movements told Ethan something else. These weren't just guards or hired muscle. They were part of an organized unit. One of the men stepped close to the rocks. Too close. Ethan slipped out from cover with the same fluid precision that had been drilled into him during Bud's training. He struck the man's wrist, spinning the barrel of the rifle aside, then drove his elbow into the man's throat. A muffled gasp followed, then silence. Before the body even hit the ground, the second gunman pivoted, raising his rifle, Rex exploded from the shadows like a force of nature. He hit the man squarely, sending him backward into a patch of shrubs. The rifle fired once, the bullet slicing bark from a nearby tree, but Rex's momentum pinned the attacker before he could adjust. The third man reacted fastest. He fired toward Rex, but Ethan tackled him from the side. They hit the forest floor hard. Pain shot through Ethan's ribs, but he ignored it and locked the man's arm in a hold that forced the rifle free. A sharp strike ended the fight. Harper crawled out slowly, eyes wide, but calm. She had seen violence before, enough to understand that what Ethan did wasn't brutality, but necessity. "Are there more?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "There will be. These were scouts." "And the one giving orders?" Ethan thought of the voice. Steady, deep, too comfortable with authority. "He's somewhere close, watching, waiting to see how we move." Harper shivered. "I heard the others call him Rowan. He arrived months ago. They said he was ex-military, the kind that doesn't lose people. A name. Finally, a name. And if Rowan had military background, this operation was more dangerous than Ethan initially believed." Thunder rolled overhead. Rain began to tap against the leaves, first in scattered drops, then in heavier sheets. The storm swallowed sound, creating the illusion of safety. But Ethan knew storms helped hunters just as much as prey. They hid movement, muffled errors, concealed danger. He needed to relocate them before Rowan adjusted the search pattern. "Harper," Ethan said, "how far is the facility you escaped from?" She pointed east. "About a mile, but you can't get in through the front. There's a drainage tunnel below the main building. That's how I slipped out." Ethan's pulse sharpened. If Harper could escape, he and Rex could infiltrate. It would be risky, but it was the only lead they had. "We go tonight," Ethan said. Harper's breath hitched. "Tonight?" "If they're preparing a transport for the children," Ethan replied. "We don't wait." But before they could move, a voice cut through the storm. It wasn't close. It wasn't far. It was somewhere perfectly positioned between. "Cole." Ethan froze. Harper's eyes widened. Rex growled almost silently. "Bring me the girl," the voice said, calm as a man discussing weather. "And bring the dog. You know what happens if you don't." The forest went still. Even the rain seemed to pause. Rex pressed against Ethan's leg, ready to fight. Harper whispered, "He knows your name." Ethan stared into the storm, mind racing. Who was Rowan? And how did he know who Ethan was before ever seeing him? Rain sweeping across Greyhaven's cliffs under a moonless sky. The storm had swallowed most of the island's noises, but Ethan Cole heard everything that mattered. The distant movements of patrol teams, the muffled static of radios, the crunch of gravel beneath disciplined boots. Rowan's voice still echoed in his head, the way it had cut through the storm with unshakable certainty. Someone who knew Ethan's name without ever meeting him wasn't guessing. He was remembering, and that made him the most dangerous predator on Greyhaven. Ethan moved swiftly through the darkness, guiding Harper along the narrow animal trail that led deeper toward the eastern ridge. Rex stayed ahead, but within sight, pausing every few seconds to test the air. The dog's instincts were razor-sharp tonight. He felt the threat hanging in the humidity like an electric charge. His movements were cautious, measured, as if he knew the slightest mistake would alert the entire island. Harper walked with surprising sure-footedness despite exhaustion, her breaths short but controlled. She had been forced to grow up too early, Anyone could see that in the way she navigated the darkness with discipline rather than fear. Ethan wondered what kind of father had taught her such skills, and what kind of loss had hardened them into instinct. "We're close," Harper murmured. "The drainage tunnel is through there." She pointed toward a cluster of moss-covered rocks near the base of the ridge. Ethan scanned the area. No movement, no unnatural shadows. With the storm as cover, most guards would be focused on perimeter shifts rather than the forest interior, but Rowan was unpredictable. "Stay low," Ethan whispered. Rex slipped forward first, nose sweeping the ground. Then his body stiffened, tail straightening, a warning. Ethan unsheathed the knife from his belt. But when he stepped closer, he saw the cause of Rex's tension. A body, a young boy, maybe 13, slumped against the rock with a blanket thrown over him. No wounds, no blood, just stillness. Ethan knelt beside him and pressed 2 fingers to the boy's neck. A pulse, faint but present. "He's sedated," Harper whispered. "They use injections. Keeps the kids quiet before transport." Her voice wavered at the last word. Ethan laid the boy down gently. "We get him out with the others once we reach them." Harper nodded, though worry tightened her jaw. Ethan scanned the rocks until he found the false panel of rusted steel half buried beneath mud. Harper pushed on one side. The panel shifted slightly. "This is it," she said. "I crawled through here." The narrow tunnel beyond smelled of salt and old metal. It led beneath the main facility, Harper explained, a place where rainwater drained before being pumped back into the sea. It wasn't meant for people, but desperate children had used it before. Ethan crawled inside first, muscles burning with every pull. Rex followed, squeezing through with quiet determination. Harper came last. The tunnel sloped downward. Water dripped like a slow, steady clock, marking every second. Ethan kept one hand on the wall, using the rough edges to guide him. Finally, a faint light glowed ahead through metal grates. Ethan peered through. A large chamber stretched below. Concrete floors, steel doors, fluorescent lights flickering against damp walls, and cages, at least 20. Children huddled together inside, some silent, some crying softly, all wearing exhaustion like a second skin. A few guards moved lazily between the cages, holding clipboards or radios. They didn't look brutal, they looked bored, and somehow that made Ethan's stomach twist even harder. "This is where they kept me," Harper whispered. Ethan's pulse sharpened. "Max might be here." Harper shook her head. "They separate new arrivals. Max could be deeper inside." Ethan studied the room. The guards weren't expecting intruders from below. Their eyes were on the main doors. "Stay behind me," he whispered. He pushed the grate slowly until the screws loosened enough to remove it. Ethan dropped silently onto the floor, landing behind a stack of metal crates. Rex jumped after him, landing without sound. Harper eased down next. The first guard turned a corner. Ethan moved like water, silent, controlled, lethal. One strike to the throat, another behind the ear, and the man slumped into Ethan's arms before he even registered the attack. Ethan lowered him behind the crates. Rex moved toward the second guard. Ethan tapped lightly twice, the command that meant wait, engage only if needed. Rex froze. The second guard walked toward the water pump system, yawning. Ethan intercepted him at the valve wheel, knocking him unconscious against the generator panel. Then he signaled Harper. They hurried toward the cages. The children inside shrank back at first, fear overshadowing hope. Ethan raised his hand slightly. "I'm here to help. Stay quiet." Harper moved to the first cage and reached through the bars, whispering gently. A small girl recognized her and started crying. Ethan forced himself to breathe steadily, working through the locks one by one, using the guard's stolen keys. "Ethan," Harper whispered suddenly. He turned. A corridor stretched beyond the far side of the chamber, a corridor he hadn't noticed before, unlit, narrow, leading into deeper darkness. A faint cry echoed from within, not a frightened cry, a desperate one, a boy's. Ethan felt the ground drop under him. "Max," he whispered. Without waiting for Harper, he sprinted toward the corridor, Rex charging with him. The narrow hallway twisted sharply twice before opening into a small containment room lit by a single hanging lamp. And there, curled in the corner, arms wrapped around himself, was Max. Ethan crossed the room and fell to his knees beside him. "Max, hey, it's me. I'm here." Max lifted his face slowly, disoriented, pupils slow to respond. Sedatives lingered in his system. "You came back," Max murmured. Ethan pulled the boy close, heart twisting with relief. "I promised." But before he could carry Max out, a metallic click echoed behind him. Ethan froze. He knew that sound, a hammer being pulled back on a pistol, and a voice followed. Steady, cold, unmistakable. "You always were predictable, Cole." Rowan, standing in the doorway, blocking their only exit. Faint emergency lights flickering beneath Grey Haven's underground chamber. The small containment room felt colder the moment Rowan stepped into the doorway. Ethan Cole shifted, pulling Max slightly behind him, while Rex moved forward with a low, vibrating growl. The hanging lamp above buzzed, casting sharp shadows across the concrete. Rowan stood steady, the pistol trained on Ethan with the confidence of a man who had made far too many decisions like this before. "Step away from the boy," Rowan said. His voice carried neither anger nor urgency, only certainty, as if the ending had already been written. Ethan rose slowly. "You know my name. Start with that." Rowan tilted his head slightly. "We crossed paths once in Kandahar. Different uniforms, same dust. You were part of a raid that ruined a very profitable operation." Memory flashed. A half-collapsed compound. A man being dragged away in cuffs. A long corridor of civilians rescued. Ethan had thought it was just another mission. Rowan saw it as a personal debt. "You turned this into a business," Ethan said. "Kids? Really?" Rowan shrugged. "The world buys what it wants. I supply it. And you, well, you were supposed to die in that warehouse, but your dog made a mess of things." Rex growled deeper. Behind them, Max swayed slightly, still groggy from sedation. Ethan slipped an arm around the boy's shoulders, steadying him. "You won't walk out of here?" Ethan said quietly. "Not tonight." Rowan smiled thinly. "Funny, I was about to tell you the same thing." He fired, but Rex lunged at the exact same moment, slamming into Ethan's side, pulling him and Max behind a metal cabinet. The bullet shattered a pipe above them, spraying steam. Ethan pushed Max flat against the wall. "Stay down," he whispered. The facility erupted with alarms as Rowan shouted commands into his radio. Footsteps thundered behind him. Ethan knew they wouldn't have long before reinforcements sealed every exit. He looked at Rex. "With me?" The dog responded instantly. Ethan moved fast, circling behind stacked crates, while Rex darted low across the floor. Rowan stepped back to avoid a sudden strike, firing again. Rex narrowly dodged, sliding behind the base of a concrete pillar. Ethan grabbed a loose metal bracket from the floor and hurled it toward the lights. Glass shattered, plunging the room into semi-darkness. Rowan cursed. His weapon was less useful now, his sightlines disrupted. Ethan rushed forward. The two men collided hard, grappling for the gun. Rowan was stronger than he looked, driven by years of hardened work and a cold philosophy that nothing mattered except results. Ethan felt pain surge through his wounded shoulder, but he pressed on. Rowan twisted, landing a strike to Ethan's ribs. Ethan staggered, but Rex launched himself upward, clamping onto Rowan's arm with ferocious loyalty born from years of protecting his partner. Rowan roared, the pistol dropping to the floor with a metallic clatter. Ethan kicked it away. Rowan swung wildly, knocking Rex aside, but the dog regained his footing, refusing to back down. Ethan landed a strike across Rowan's jaw. The man stumbled, hit the wall, and slid down, dazed but conscious. Footsteps echoed again. Reinforcements. Harper appeared in the hallway entrance, breathless, holding the keys Ethan had given her to release the children. The rescued kids clustered behind her, frightened but free. "Ethan!" Harper shouted. "We have to go now." Ethan grabbed Max, lifting him into his arms. "Lead them to the drainage exit. Rex, go!" Rex herded the children quickly, nudging them toward the tunnel path. Harper kept them moving. But as Ethan took one step toward the hallway with Max cradled in his arms, Rowan lunged from the floor and grabbed Ethan's ankle, pulling hard. Ethan fell to one knee, shielding Max with his body. Rowan snarled through bloody teeth, "You don't get to walk away again." Ethan twisted, kicked Rowan's hand free, and dragged Max toward the hall. But Rowan rose, grabbing Ethan's vest from behind. Ethan turned, bracing for another blow, when a deafening explosion shook the facility. Pipes burst. Sparks rained. Concrete groaned. Somewhere above, a generator had overloaded. Rowan lost his footing. Ethan shoved him backward, sending him crashing into an electrical junction box. Sparks erupted, and Rowan collapsed, unconscious. "You're done," Ethan whispered. He didn't wait to see if Rowan would rise again. He carried Max into the hallway, following Harper and Rex through the narrow tunnel as alarms blared overhead. His vision blurred, adrenaline masking the injuries that now tore through him like fire. They reached the chamber near the exit pipe just as the facility began to collapse behind them. The children crawled out first, Harper encouraging each one. Ethan passed Max through the opening. Rex barked urgently from outside. Then Ethan's strength buckled. He leaned heavily against the tunnel wall. His breath faltered. Rex crawled halfway back into the tunnel, whining, nudging Ethan's chest. "I'm okay," Ethan murmured, a lie shaped like a promise. He pushed Rex out. "Go! Protect them!" Rex obeyed, but reluctantly, watching Ethan until the very last second. When the children and Rex reached the forest clearing, a distant rumble shook the ground, the tunnel collapsing behind Ethan. Inside, Ethan fought to stay conscious long enough to crawl through the last few yards. His vision dimmed. Max, barely awake, reached through the opening with trembling hands. "Ethan, please." Ethan lifted his arm toward him. The world tilted. Darkness swept in, and Ethan Cole finally went still, snow drifting softly outside the emergency bay of Portland Naval Hospital. The world came back to Ethan Cole in fragments, as if consciousness were a door swinging open, then slamming shut again. He didn't feel the cold. He didn't feel the pain. For a moment, he felt nothing at all, only a long tunnel of muffled voices, fading sirens, and the heaviness of a body that no longer followed his commands. When the rescue helicopter had swept over Greyhaven at dawn, Rex had been the first to run toward it, barking until the medics understood someone was still trapped. They found the children gathered with Harper in a clearing, but Rex refused to move from the collapsed tunnel, pawing at the dirt, whining in frantic, desperate bursts. Minutes later, Ethan's body was pulled out from the debris. He was unconscious, covered in dust and blood, his breaths shallow as though each one had to be begged for. Max clung to Ethan's arm the entire flight, refusing to let go even when medics tried to pull him back. Now, inside the glowing white hallways of Portland Naval Hospital, the fight for Ethan's life began. Rex paced outside the operating room door, refusing to sit, refusing to rest, refusing to blink, as if each second might decide Ethan's survival. The dog's body still bore scratches and bruises, but he stayed upright, trembling with loyalty more than pain. Max stood beside him, wrapped in a hospital blanket. He was still pale from the sedatives, still shaking from what he had endured, but he didn't leave Rex's side. Inside, a team of doctors worked relentlessly. One of them, Dr. Reynolds, a trauma surgeon with decades of battlefield experience, flicked through Ethan's scans. His voice was stern but steady, the kind that had delivered both miracles and tragedy. Collapsed lung, internal bleeding, severe exhaustion, multiple fractures, he muttered to the team. He's held on longer than most men would. We're not losing him now. Hours blurred. Alarms chimed. Machines pulsed. Nurses moved like shadows. Ethan lay motionless beneath the harsh white lights while surgeons fought to rebuild what Greyhaven had torn apart. Outside the room, Max sat on the floor, head bowed. Harper approached him quietly. She wore fresh clothes provided by social services, though her face still carried the weight of too much experience for her age. "He's strong," she whispered. "He came back for all of us. He'll fight to come back again." Max didn't answer. He simply leaned against Rex, who lowered his head beside the boys. Hours later, Dr. Reynolds stepped out. His face was lined with fatigue, but his eyes were brighter than before. "He made it through surgery," the doctor said. "He's not out of danger yet, but he's fighting." Max burst into tears, the kind he had held back for far too long. Rex licked his cheek once, as if reminding him that hope was not a fragile thing. They were allowed into the recovery room once Ethan had been stabilized. Ethan lay connected to machines that beeped steadily, each sound echoing like a heartbeat. His face was pale, wrapped in bruises, but his chest rose and fell. Slow, steady, stubborn. Max approached first. "Ethan," he whispered, "you kept your promise. Now I'm keeping mine. I'm not leaving." Rex gently placed his head on the edge of the bed, nudging Ethan's hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Ethan's fingers twitched, just barely, but enough for Rex to lift his head in recognition, tail thumping weakly against the floor. Enough for Max to choke back another sob. Dr. Reynolds stepped in quietly. "That's a good sign," he said softly. "He knows you're here." Harper stood at the foot of the bed, silent but relieved. She had survived so much darkness, but this, seeing Ethan breathe, was the first real light she had witnessed in months. As evening settled outside the windows, the crisis of the day finally settled into a fragile calm. Nurses adjusted Ethan's blankets. Machines hummed their steady rhythms. Max curled up in a chair beside the bed, drifting into the first safe sleep he had known in weeks. Rex remained awake, long after everyone else had succumbed to exhaustion, watching Ethan with the unwavering focus of a guardian who had chosen his human long ago. And somewhere between the steady heartbeat monitor and the soft hum of winter wind through the hospital vents, Ethan's lips parted ever so slightly, not enough for words, just enough for a breath that promised he was not done, a breath that whispered he was still fighting his way back. Dawn crept over the horizon, soft, pale, gentle, and Ethan Cole remained alive beneath it. In the moments between life and death, when Ethan's heartbeat faded to a fragile whisper, some might call what happened next a coincidence. But those who believe in something greater know no journey unfolds outside the hands of God. If Rex hadn't cried out in desperate loyalty, if Max hadn't reached for Ethan through the darkness, if the rescue helicopter hadn't arrived at the exact second Dawn touched the treetops, would there have been a miracle left to save him? Every day, in the chaos of work, fear, loss, and uncertainty, we often forget that God places quiet guardians beside us, our own Rex. They might be a friend, a parent, a stranger's kindness, or even a small sign we overlook, but they are there, reminding us we never walk alone. And sometimes the darkest hour becomes the very moment a miracle steps in. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below, tell us what moved you most, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and redemption. May God protect you, your family, and everyone fighting silent battles right now. May He send you strength, peace, and a Rex of your own just when you need it most. Amen.